Last night, the whole political landscape for 2012 changed. It actually had nothing to do with Michigan or Arizona or Rick Santorum or Mitt Romney or even Ron Paul's secret delegate strategy. It had nothing to do with any of those guys. Last night, the entire political landscape for Washington for 2012 changed before we even got the results of those two primaries last night. So hold that thought. In April 2010, just before he retired from the Supreme Court, Justice John Paul Stevens did an interview in his chambers with a reporter for the New York Times named Adam Liptak. And at the age of 90, on the eve of his retirement, Justice Stevens said when he looked back at his career, when he looked back at every one of the Supreme Court justices who had joined the court in the previous generation, in the previous 35 years, he told Adam Liptak every single one of them had been more conservative than the justice that he or she replaced, with only two possible exceptions over 35 years. Think about that for a second. When a Republican president replaced justices on the Supreme Court, they picked judges further to the right than the judges that were being replaced. Also, when Democrats picked new justices for the Supreme Court over the past 35 years, the justice arriving was almost always more conservative than the justice who had been there before. This doesn't mean that Democrats always picked, hardcore right-wingers or anything, but it means that overall, over time, it has been a steady, deliberate march to the right on the Supreme Court, even for judges picked by Democrats. Similarly, the presidency. When political scientists in this case, in this country, a political science professor from the University of Georgia is what the data we're going to show right now. When political scientists in this country track the liberalness and conservativeness of presidents and their political positions, you get a graph that looks like this. Now, it looks confusing at first, but don't be confused. It's actually really simple and it totally makes sense. This is a graph that's about moderation. You see that dotted yellow line that runs down the middle? That is moderation. That is the line that indicates neither liberal nor conservative. That means moderate. That is the center in terms of policy positions. The further up you get on the graph, that means the more conservative you are. The further down you get on the graph, the more liberal you are. Okay, so moderate in the middle, conservative at the top, liberal at the bottom. Now, obviously, Republican presidents broadly are more conservative. They're up at the top. And Democrats broadly are more liberal. But over time, from Ike to Nixon and Ford, and then from Reagan to Bush the first, and then up to Bush the second, you see them moving up? Republican presidents are getting more conservative over time. Republicans getting more conservative. But here's the thing. So are Democrats. Both of these lines, right, are going in the same direction. They're all heading up the graph. Republicans are getting more conservative by leaps and bounds, but Democrats are chasing them. LBJ was more conservative than John F. Kennedy. Bill Clinton was more conservative than Jimmy Carter. And Barack Obama is more conservative than Bill Clinton. But wait, I thought he was a communist. Stop. We're talking political science here. We will resume the partisan screaming in just a moment. But the Supreme Court, through Republican presidencies and through Democratic presidencies, is getting more conservative. The presidency, through Republican presidents and Democratic presidents, is also getting more conservative. The Congress, shocker, this is from the same political scientist at the University of Georgia using the same measures of liberal and conservative, right? They've tracked this for both the House and the Senate. It's the same basic pattern for both of them. It's a little easier to see with the House data, so we'll look at the House. Again, the basic idea here is that the middle line here, the middle line, the yellow line in the middle there, that is set at 0. That is neither conservative nor liberal. The middle line runs down the middle. It marks moderate. The higher up you get, the more conservative. The lower down you get, the more liberal. And obviously, Republicans are more conservative, so they're up top, and Democrats are more liberal, so they're down below. But check this out. The two lines you see on each side of the middle there are the most moderate members of each party. So those lines are more toward the middle, more toward the center. The lines at the very top and the lines at the very bottom, those are the more partisan people, the more partisan members of each party. So this shows where those moderates and the partisans in the Republican Party and the moderates and the partisans in the Democratic Party have been in our country from around Reconstruction, like post-Civil War, to roughly 1975. Then look what's happened since 1975. Look what happens to those red lines up top. Those are the Republicans, getting way more conservative. The Republicans, both the super partisan Republicans and the moderates, shoot up toward the top of that graph. They shoot off in a conservative direction. Democrats stay roughly the same. since 1975. I mean, the most partisan Democrats, that's the very bottom line there, they stay basically exactly where they have been over not just the last generation, but the last several generations. Moderate Democrats, that's that other line there, they get marginally more liberal over time, but barely. I mean, looking at the rest of these lines, they stay pretty much flat. But the Republicans, look, both the moderates and the super partisan Republicans, they just fly off the charts. If you look over time, the craziest, hair-on-fire, most extreme Republican in 1975, which is that top arrow right there, that person's super crazy far right-wing positions in 1975 are where the most moderate Republicans are now. That's where the most liberal Republicans are now. They have the positions that were far to the right of the Republican Party just a generation ago. That has happened over one generation. Again, partisan Democrats over this time have stayed pretty much exactly the same. Moderate Democrats have gotten slightly more liberal, but they're basically the same, while the Republicans have gone off the charts. The most extreme liberals in the Democratic Party are as far away from the moderate position as the most liberal Republican. So, on the Supreme Court, they're storming to the right. The presidency, storming to the right. Congress, storming to the right, too. And in Congress, that dynamic of storming to the right, it's important to see it. That dynamic of storming to the right in Congress is happening all on the right. Republicans are getting way more conservative over the past generation, and it's happening very, very fast. And Democrats are kind of staying where they're at. And so the most important news for 2012 politics that broke last night is this. Republican Senator Olympia Snowe of Maine is quitting. The most moderate-ish Republican senator, goodbye. If you're marching to the right, if you're making the new normal in Republican politics further to the right every year, frankly, you can't afford to have your average dragged down by somebody who isn't sprinting rightward as fast as the rest of you. And this political project of the American right sort of makes sense. This is a consequence, I think, of the Republican Party and the conservative movement not being the same thing. There's nothing like this on the left. There's no dynamic like this on the left. But on the right, there's a conservative movement. It's largely corporate. It's ideological, too, but it's largely corporate. And they've got a long-term perspective. They've got their eyes on the horizon. They've got an overall, big-picture, generations-long goal of making the country more right-wing. And so, you know, people in my job, we waste all of this breath. We do all this stupid short-term punditry about how it makes no sense that the Republicans are going so hardcore right-wing. They're way to the right of the electorate on this issue or that issue. Boy, this is going to cost them a seat. This might cost them an election. Why are they going so far to the right of where the center of the electorate is? It's because they don't care what happens in the short term. Losing a few seats here and there does not matter if the long-term project is dragging the country, dragging the center, to the point where, frankly, a Ronald Reagan running for president today would have to pick Dennis Kucinich as his running mate. It's a long-term goal. And so Olympia Snowe, one of the last endangered species Republican moderate-ish senators, calls it quits. And the immediate consequence of this, the thing that gets pundits and, frankly, Democrats all very excited, is that, as NBC's First Read put it today, this gives Democrats a better than 50-50 chance of holding on to the Senate in November. And that is a big deal for 2012. But a move like this also inevitably leads to a lot of stupidity, to a lot of hand-wringing bad punditry about how moderates can't survive in Washington anymore because both sides have gotten so extreme. If you have a piece of scrap paper anywhere near you, just tear off a little strip of it like this and then ball it up and put it in your mouth and start chewing on the strip. And the next time somebody gets on your TV screen and says, both parties have gotten so extreme, you just eject one of those wads of paper at the screen. Spitballing will not make the Beltway stop saying this stupid thing, but it will make you feel better. I do it myself in my office, trust me. This is not a pox on both their houses story. This is not a, oh, mirror image, both sides so extreme. There is nothing that the Democratic Party did or that liberals did to make it impossible for Olympia Snowe to stay in the Senate. This is not a Democratic story. It's not a both sides story. It's a story about the right. And it is true that Olympia Snowe leaving will make it much harder for Maine Republicans to hold on to that one seat. But frankly, to them, that is roadkill. That one seat is essentially just roadkill for the larger Republican project of moving all Republican politics so far to the right that when Democrats inevitably chase Republicans, when Democrats inevitably try to find some middle ground between where Democrats have always been and where Republicans have sprinted to, that middle ground, that compromise place, that triangulated center, ends up being a very, very right-wing place.